So opportunistic investing is we see a property, the client's not actively looking, but we see it's such a good buying opportunity. We mention it to the client buys the property, and then they flip that property in 1 to 2 years because the capital growth's been so strong. We've bought a property, in the 800,000s, and we sell it for 1.1. We say to the client, this is a good time to get out of this property. I think the growth has been fantastic. There's a lot of activity from buyers in that region of the coast now. I think you should look at selling it. And that's exactly what's just happened with the client in the last 2 months.
Welcome to the Path to Passive podcast, where we talk about building wealth and empowering lifestyle through commercial real estate investing for tech professionals. I always wish that other tech professionals reaching financial freedom had documented their journey along the way, so I'm doing it for the rest of us. Join as we explore stories, many failures, and lessons learned along the way. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Path to Passive Real Estate Investing for Tech Professionals. I'm your host, Steven Arita, and today I have the opportunity to sit down with Simon Thomas, who's the founding director of Coast Property Buyers. Now, you're going to hear Simon have a bit of an accent, an Australian accent, in fact, because he is out there at the Sunshine Coast of Australia. And really cool to chat with him to learn a little bit about where the Gold Coast is, Sunshine Coast, where the Sunshine Coast is relative to the Gold Coast and Sydney, like I was about to say. Hear about the demographics and the pricing and why it is that people love to live there. I also get to explore and learn from Simon about the services that him and his team provide as a buyer group. It's really cool. They have a full service, they have a partial service, and they actually will represent you at auction as well. And so we got to dive into a little bit of the meat and potatoes, some content about how really the real estate system there in Australia is, I'll say, regulated, or another way to say is really deregulated, and why it's so important to have a buyer group like Simon and his team to be there to work with you, represent you, and the clients that they work with as well. So that was a lot of fun to dive into. And of course, we are investors here. If you're listening, you're an investor too. So he talks about how he can work with investors that are based in Australia, whether it's same state, other states, and of course, many of there are investors that he'll work with that are overseas as well. And of course, many of you listening here is here in the United States as well. So if you've ever been interested in hearing about how you might be able to work with someone that is across the pond, across the water over in Australia as well, you definitely want to listen to this one and get a feel for how Simon and his team can support you. So hope you enjoy this. If you do, please like, subscribe, add a comment, email me, connect with me on LinkedIn, whatever works best for you, and meet you where you're at. Of course, any other additional ideas for topics, if you want to dive deeper into something, ask Simon a question or anything like that, you can reach out direct to him, or we can have another episode on that to dive into a full conversation there too. So I hope you enjoy and enjoy this episode with him. Cheers. Have a great one. Mr. Simon Thomas, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you. Pleasure to have you here from Coast Property Buyers in the Sunshine Coast, which, getting to know you and your team, I was like, okay, I've been to the Gold Coast, but Sunshine Coast is completely different. Before we get into, absolutely everything, just give me a quick introduction for yourself. Like, who are you and where exactly is the Sunshine Coast? Just kind of relative to, Sydney, where I know a lot of my listeners are familiar with.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for having me, mate. It's a pleasure to be online with you today. So the Sunshine Coast is in Queensland. I think it's the premier coastal market of Australia. Now, Sydney is obviously the capital of New South Wales. That's a southern state based on where Queensland is. So there's the entire east coast of Australia. So if you look at the map of Australia, Queensland is the top of the east coast, then New South Wales, then Victoria. So Queensland's the northern state above New South Wales. And everyone knows Sydney, the Harbour Bridge, Bondi Beach, Opera House, etc. So we're quite a distance north of there. So the next state north, the capital of Queensland is Brisbane. And then you've got two coastal regions, two primary, I'd say, coastal regions. There's other coastal regions north of us. There's two main coastal regions in southeast Queensland. One is south of Brisbane, that's the Gold Coast. And a lot of people would have heard of the Gold Coast. They make a lot of Hollywood blockbusters there. There's a movie studio there. There's some awesome beaches, lots of high-rise casinos, all that sort of thing, big shopping centres. And then we're probably a little bit more reserved than the Gold Coast. We're a bit of a quieter, not a quieter real estate or property market, but our population's nowhere near as big. So we're north of Brisbane, and we're called the Sunshine Coast. So Queensland is known as the Sunshine State. So the weather is predominantly warmer. Probably I'd compare it to maybe Florida in the States, maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
It's Queensland. It's a warmer state. So there's a lot of attraction to, that's why obviously hence our business operates to help buyers to either move here or invest here. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a snapshot. But there's a lot of traffic out of Brisbane. Typically, like we're obviously having this chat on a Friday. So this afternoon, a lot of Brisbane residents will either head north or south on the highway to get away from the city life and relax, stay in an apartment, stay in a beach house, go to the beach, have a coffee, have a drink, have a barbecue, just relax. So there's a massive migration of Brisbane residents out of the city on a Friday afternoon. They either head north to the Sunshine Coast or south to the Gold Coast.
Awesome. The word as you're explaining that sounds, a word comes to mind of like refined, because a little bit more refined than what would be.
We're not as busy. The Gold Coast is very busy. I mean, I love the Gold Coast. I've been there many times with my family on holidays. I've got friends that live down there. There's some awesome buyers agents I know that are based on the Goldie. But I probably prefer to live. That's myself personally. I prefer to live in a more relaxed environment. That's just me. Yeah.
Totally. So is it fair to approximate then? I'm thinking if you're a little bit above the Gold Coast, that's like what, maybe 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
then
that's
probably
about right. 2.5 hours from the Gold Coast to the Sunshine Coast. That's it. Yep.
But from Sydney, it's like two hours north.
From Sydney.
By plane.
Oh, yeah, by plane. Yeah, you could get to Sydney in probably an hour and a half. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Hour 20, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. Just kind of.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. So, a little bit quieter. Is it? It's a place maybe a little more. Obviously, you're talking about Gold Coast, busier. You're talking about movie studios. You're talking about the casinos. That kind of very. I totally agree as well. It's very. It's almost kind of. It's almost like Miami light, trying to be a little bit like that, or similar like that. But so, tell me a little bit more about like the demographics around where you're at.
So one of the biggest differences, I'm not sure whether you want me to compare it to the Gold Coast, that some of your listeners...
Just in general, thinking about like the market, because many people here are, they're listening, they're investors. There's people listening from, a smaller set that's already in Australia. There could be people that across the United States are interested in investing overseas, just trying to get a feel for, as it, what does the market look like?
So the market at the moment is still very healthy compared to other parts of Australia. There is a well-known saying that was probably mentioned about 20 years ago. There's only 3 real estate markets in Australia. There's Sydney, there's Melbourne, which is the capital of Victoria. Melbourne's a very affluent real estate market. So there's Sydney, Melbourne are 2 of the markets, and the third market is the rest of Australia. Because that's regional, northern, western, central. So our market at the moment is quite patchy. In Australia, we've had interest rate rises that we haven't seen for 10 years, and that's been happening over the last 18 months.
Sure.
However, the supply-demand gap is ever increasing. So because of the reasons I've already mentioned about our climate, beaches, infrastructure improvements, access to Brisbane, international airport that's been installed through COVID. So that's going to attract more traffic onto the coast. So there's a high demand for property on the Sunshine Coast, and the supply is only so much. We don't have the dense population of the Gold Coast, so we don't have a lot of high density um, infrastructure. And what I mean by high density is you go to the Gold Coast, and all along the strip, which is the beachfront, are high-rise apartments.
Mm.
40, 50, 60 levels. We have that on the Sunshine Coast, but nowhere near. I think back when town planning was rolling out, probably the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even 80s and 90s, the Sunshine Coast was a lot more conservative in that approach. Having said that, all along the east coast, the coastline of the Sunshine Coast, that's from Noosa down to Caloundra, that whole coastline is dotted with high-rise apartments, but nowhere near the volume that you get on the Gold Coast. So we have less apartments for sale, so therefore that keeps the property market pretty strong. And then you move away from the coast into the like the hinterland, and even like I've got an office in Buderim and I've got an office in Noosa. So our Buderim office, which is where I'm recording this today,
Nice.
is we're only like 6-7 minute drive to the beach, but we're in a village, and we've got beautiful ocean views from here because we're up on a mountain. Buderim's built on a mountain. So the demographics very different. We appeal to retirees, and empty nesters. We appeal to young families, mature families, first time buyers, young couples that are looking to move here, and then obviously individual investors. I mean, we're pretty much, and there's a lot of people, particularly from overseas, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, that buy holiday homes here because they holiday here every year. I've got very good friends of mine from Melbourne. They're in real estate themselves. They own property in Noosa. They own holiday homes and holiday units in Noosa. They spend a lot of time up here because this time of the year, it's now spring in Australia and the weather's glorious. It's probably 23, 24 degrees. So it's magnificent. That's obviously Celsius, not Fahrenheit.
Yep. Picking that up for sure. I always have to. It's probably like mid 70s or so. I could be wrong. I have to double check.
I haven't really done the calculation, but yeah, for those in Australia, it's about 23 degrees here at the moment.
Awesome. A quick math on that on the internet's it's about 78 degrees Fahrenheit. So outstanding.
Okay.
That's super cool. So retirees, early, younger families, couples. You're talking about some investment units there as well. And when you're talking about units there for the investment side, is that single family homes, single family residence? Yes, you're referring to units. You're not talking about like apartments. You're talking about
Units or apartments. Sorry, yeah. So the language we use apartments, units or flats, but mainly apartments, and they're mainly along the beachfront. But they're also, once you move away from the beach, there's also apartment buildings in other parts of the coast. But there's certain areas of the coast that appeal to everybody. Not everyone wants to be on the beach. We've got some areas of the Sunshine Coast that have been thriving for the last 5 years because they're along a railway network. Some people still moved to the Sunshine Coast to live but work in Brisbane. So there's a train line that carries them obviously from the Sunshine Coast hinterland down into Brisbane and beyond to the Gold Coast. So the transport network's pretty good, probably not as good as the States. I'm not familiar with the transport network over there, but it's very easy to get around. It's getting a little bit more congested. The council have announced some plans for light rail, which will help people get from A to B a lot quicker because the Sunshine Coast is only a certain size and it had a certain population of, say, 250,000 people maybe 15, 20 years ago. Now there's 350,000 people and growing, and the coast is still the same size. So they've had to develop land that was under forestry or was on the other side of the highway. They've had to bring in some new transport corridors to help with that extra flow of traffic. So I've been up here, I moved here in 2008. So I've been here, 16, 17 years, and I've seen some massive changes in the time I've been here. But the interesting thing about the Sunshine Coast, in that time that I've been here, I've met possibly 15 to 20 like true local residents.
Hmm.
So they were born in the hospital in Nambour, which is the old hospital. We've since had new hospitals develop. Their parents are from here. Their grandparents are from here. They're true locals.
Yeah.
Like I'm not from here. None of my staff are from here. Agents that I work with, sales agents and real estate agents I work with, are not from here. Other business people are not from here. So there's been this massive attraction. We've all either come from other parts of Australia or other parts of the world to move to this part of the world that we think is paradise because of the climate and the beaches and the national parks and the housing. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's an affordable housing area. That's probably an issue that we need to deal with, I think, personally, politically. But yeah, it's a great place to live and work. Very
Yeah.
fortunate to be here.
No, that's awesome. It is. I think that paints a really good picture to learn more about it. I'm in a place, Austin, Texas, south of Dallas, Texas, which you probably have heard of.
Yeah.
Maybe south 4 hours driving.
Now,
So
can I ask you a question, Stephen?
yeah, of course, go ahead.
Are the Dallas cheerleaders as a bigger deal as what my son and I watched that series on Netflix? And like I love sport. My son loves sport. We watch anything. If it's sport, we're there.
Yeah.
And I was just fascinated by that Netflix series on the Dallas cheerleaders. But those girls work so hard. They're icons.
Oh man. So Dallas Cowboys in general, it's like huge brand across Texas, and Dallas.
Yeah,
Yes, it's very big. It's very big. Football in general across all of Texas is massive,
yeah,
and
right.
you consider the land mass. It it took me a couple years ago. I drove out of Texas to go to a different state for some Christmas stuff. Dude, it took us 8 hours to get out of Texas,
Yeah,
and
right.
so, anyway, I only mention
Yeah,
that because the culture of football, the Dallas Cowboys, the cheerleaders brand, like it's widely known. It's widely known, just as an aside, and it's quite impressive. So, sports here is no joke. College football is very popular as well,
yeah.
and so forth. But we can talk sports all day long. So.
Yeah, exactly. I know we're not here to. I'm just intrigued by, and I think whoever agreed, whether it was the owner of the Cowboys or the lady, I can't remember her name, who runs that cheerleading organisation, whoever decided to allow Netflix to do that series, it's a real insight, and I think it just does the brand nothing but good.
Absolutely, I'd agree. There's a lot of things Texas wise that could be its
I,
own series.
I'm now a fan. I'm now a fan of the Cowboys. Definitely.
Cowboy fans just rejoice. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway,
Little segue there. Sorry about that.
no, it's all good. It's all good. It's kind of the fun of it. So, getting to know a little more about the area. It's there's lots of transplants that are there. You talk about knowing only a handful, 20 odd something. There are people that are kind of, local, that were born in that hospital there and kind of have generations there, but everyone else has kind of come in, right? Like you're talking about, new airports that have been there international a couple years ago, young couples, people that live there but also work near Brisbane. That's probably maybe 20, 30 minutes away by train. Is that about right?
No, it'd be a bit further than that. It'd be about 45 minutes, I reckon.
Cool,
Yeah.
no problem. But as a commute, and so you're also saying that things are getting a little more expensive than you were. I forget exactly how you're saying, but that brings me to the point that I think as the listeners are understanding the market, right? Give me some idea of what some of the prices that you're talking about. If someone were, I understand it could vary amongst, the client that you would help with to, um,
Yep.
help them. But give me an idea about like the spread, if you could, of a range, excuse me, of maybe some of the prices from housing.
Yeah, great question, Stephen. So we in fact, we had some new clients that engaged us this week, and they're always intrigued. What's your typical avatar client look like? We help a lot of families. We help a lot of young families with two or three children or a baby and a toddler that have either been renting locally and want to move into their own home, or they move here for work, they move here to retire. So entry level, and this is not coast. So when I talk about the Sunshine Coast, I don't want the listeners to get confused and say the Sunshine Coast is all coastline.
Mm.
The Sunshine Coast is a massive region. Geographically, it's a massive region. So, and we've got a big team that need to service that region, because if it's on the Sunshine Coast and it's property related, we'll be able to help you. So entry level for housing, it's going to be different for housing and different for, say, apartments or units.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's easier, I'll just refer to them as apartments.
Yep.
So entry level housing away from the beach, is probably in that 500,000. These are Aussie dollars, 500,000 to say 750,000. That would be affordable housing away from the coast. Entry level just to buy. So there's a lot of old style, what we call low set, which means they're single level. They've been built back in the 50s and the 60s. They're the old fisherman shacks or the old surfer shacks.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by shacks, they're just old buildings. Very basic, 2 or 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, no parking. They're on a standard size block. So on the beach, any of the beach suburbs, your entry level is minimum probably 1 million to 1,100,000.
Got it. Now, away from the beach, is that like 15, 20 minutes?
No, away from the beach. So where I am at the moment, we're in Budrum. We're in a suburb built on the mountain, and we have amazing properties up here because we're on a mountain. We've got views of the mountain in a lot of the areas of Budrum. That's prime Budrum. Mm-hmm. But no, you can be like 5 to 7 minutes drive to the beach.
Got it. And that's what you're referring to when you were just describing those that are, air quotes, away from the beach.
Away from the beach, yeah. So entry level housing away from the beach, would be 750 to 900,000.
Got
and
it.
upwards of $1 million, and that's changed remarkably since COVID. The COVID 2020, 2021 in particular was a crazy time for property on the Sunshine Coast. We had severe lockdowns particularly in New South Wales and Victoria. Mm-hmm. And we were buying a lot of properties for clients, sight unseen, because no one could get the borders were closed.
Yeah.
There's no flights. Planes couldn't fly. People couldn't travel. Probably similar to the States, I'd imagine. But yeah, I mean, and back to your question, sorry, is that like that sort of entry level? Then we go all the way up to some of the best real estate in Queensland, not just on the Sunshine Coast, is in a suburb of Noosa called Sunshine Beach. And there's properties up there that sell for between 15 and 30 million. So it's a whole different topic. It's next level.
So it's really one of those, so what I'm trying to narrow down, and massive range, like you're talking about, from, the younger families getting to their first place to could be the 30 million McMansion type of thing, is giving the listeners an idea of, I guess it really depends where along the coast.
Yeah, it depends on, yeah. So if you had a listener that rang me and said, Simon, this is my budget, where can I buy?
Yeah. So
we might have a select group of suburbs that you can, and it'll be property type and suburb specific. The type of property you buy and suburb specific. Yeah.
Makes a ton of sense. So what about, imagine that range, very similar conversation, right? For apartments, units, as well, massive range to purchase too. Let's talk about kind of from like an investor perspective. Everything about the podcast is real estate for tech professionals, so they're very interested from a investing perspective. I know you help people that are looking to get into their first home, but also
is a buyer group helping to buy a property for investment too.
Yeah.
Actually, pause right there. We're kind of dancing around that, but give me a little more description of what are some of the different services that you do to help your clients. So,
Yep.
uh,
Yep. So,
talk,
yeah, great question. So the majority of the work we do is what we call our full service. Our full service, the client or the customer rings us.
mhm,
I'm really struggling. I don't know the coast very well, or I'm time poor. Because our clients, we break our clients up into local. So we have clients that live on the Sunshine Coast. We help them buy on the Sunshine Coast because they're very time poor.
yeah,
We're talking to a couple at the moment, two young kids, and he operates a very successful business. They've been trying to do this themselves for the last 3 months, and they're just frustrated. So
mm,
without a buyer's agent, the only time they have is weekends. And this time of the year, I'd rather be at the beach or going for a bushwalk or, going for a drive in the country. I mean, lining up to talk to real estate agents, that'll be the last thing on my mind. But anyway, that's me, but I do it professionally. So we look after locals, we look after out of area clients. So out of area clients live in Queensland. They're North Queensland, they're Brisbane, they're Gold Coast, they're Toowoomba, or in the outer areas of Queensland or the Sunshine Coast. Then there's interstate clients. There's obviously they live in other parts of Australia. And then there's our international clients, our clients that live overseas. So the majority of what we do is what we call our full service. So the customer comes to us and says, Simon, we want a 4-bedroom home. We want 2 living areas, 2 bathrooms, double lock-up garage for the vehicles. We want a minimum land size of 850 square metres. You probably work in square feet, but we work in square metres. And we want a pool, and we want an area. We've got 3 young kids, and we want room for the kids to run around the backyard. And our budget is 1.5 million to 1.8 million. That's our brief. And then we do everything. We set them up on a platform. We describe the properties, the address, the bedrooms, the bathrooms. We do a video walkthrough on every property we look at. We check for flooding. We check for fire hazards. We check for easements and covenants. Anything that might be an alarm bell for them, we check all that for them. So they can just sort of sit back and relax. No pressure. They can just go about their daily lives, work-wise, and just whatever they want to do on the weekend. We would probably look at, on average, anywhere from 6 properties to 10 properties a week for clients
wow,
because we have a team. So the full service means they can just press pause, have a rest, put their feet up, work hard, enjoy their family, enjoy their partners, go away, do whatever they want to do. And then when we find something that we think suits them, it's only then that we say, look, guys, look, Stephen, we've found you 3 properties we think suit you. You've already
mm,
looked at the video walkthrough. You've already seen the attributes, the location, the view, if there's a view, the outlook, the streetscape. We do a video of the streetscape. These are your neighbours. This is the surrounding architecture of the homes. It's a new area. It's an up-and-coming suburb, whatever it might be. And then we don't disturb you, and you haven't got to run around looking at 20 or 30 homes. You're looking at 3. And invariably, you'll probably buy one of those 3. And we do all the negotiations. We sort out the contracts with the solicitors or the lawyers, if you like. I'm not sure how it works in the States, but we use conveyancers who work for solicitor firms. We get a building report done. We get a pest management report done. So we pretty much do everything.
full
We pretty
service,
much do everything.
yeah,
And then, so that's the full service. There's another service that we also offer, and it's called Assess and Negotiate. Assess and Negotiate means that Stephen, through his own online research, has found a home, but needs some help with ascertaining value. Like what's it worth? Because in Australia or in Queensland in particular, we have different legislation, and sometimes agents are not very transparent with disclosing a price. That's just how the industry works. It's unfortunate, but again, the reason buyer's agents exist is there's no consumer protection in Australia. It's pretty much every man, woman, and child for themselves. So the assess and negotiate means that you're presenting us with an option that you think suits you, and then we go and inspect it, and we assess its suitability to you and your family because you tell us this is what we're looking for, and then we buy it on your behalf. So we provide some protection from overpaying. Okay, so that's an assess and negotiate service. And then there's also auction bidding. So um, maybe not so much in the States. Obviously, you're aware of what an auction is. So in Australia, there's a lot of properties transacted via the auction method. So, I think we've got an auction we've got to attend for a client this afternoon. And then we've got some other auctions we need to go to tomorrow, and then other auctions we need to attend next week. So sometimes people just need a hand bidding for them at auction, because auctions can be quite intimidating, and people really don't know what they're doing. And again, property is very much an emotional purchase. If it's not a investment, and you're buying your own home, you got 4 or 5 couples lined up on a stranger's front lawn, and you got an auctioneer yelling prices at you. You've got to pay more, Stephen. You've got to pay more, Stephen. You've got to pay more, Stephen. That can be quite intimidating.
Totally.
And
It's like, what do I do?
Hey?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, oh God, do I do it again? Do I add
Yeah,
more?
I don't know if it's worth this much.
Right.
Is it worth this much? And that's where there's no price analysis done, and that's where we come in. So we assist and say, guys, if you'd rather stay at home, either have a scotch or a wine or a sherry or a cup of tea, whatever you prefer to do, sit somewhere comfortable. We'll be on the phone. We'll be at the auction for you. Just leave it with us. And we've already discussed pricing. We give them a couple of prices to consider where we see value. And if they say to us, Simon, you think it's worth $1 million, we're happy to pay $1,060,000. That's fine. That's up to them. But we've assessed the value of the property at $1 million. Competition may take it over $1 million, but we give them the information that they can use. They can either ignore that information, but they often just are intimidated by attending the auction. So that's where we help.
Got it. So you like you're saying, you have that full service that is like, it was called the full service, just like you said, and that is very much A to Z, start to finish on
100%.
You'll get all of the different options, do all of the property inspections, doing all the, checking out those different neighborhoods, narrow it down and say, here are our 3, and doing some video walkthroughs as well. And then you have that assess and negotiate, which is kind of like that lighter version. If I have some already in mind, you can help, get that second pair of eyes on it, right?
Yep.
And do other inspections, do negotiations, contract reviews. I think you talked about, working with lawyers as well. That is needed there too, and really that helpful hand there. And then on the other side, you do some auction representation as well. And I have some follow-up questions here. We'll start from this last one here on the auctions. Is this because are these like distressed properties, like distressed homes, or is this like from people that here in the States, usually things go to auction because of people not being able to pay for their mortgages or the bank note, right? And it goes into a whole process of foreclosure. I'm not sure if that's as
I know
well.
what you mean. Yep.
That's when it goes to auction. Is this a completely different way of business, like an auction in Australia?
100%. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a recognised method of sale. So
Got it.
there's two main methods of sale in Australia. There's just mainly two that real estate agents would implement.
Mm-hmm.
So one is for sale.
Straightforward.
It's for sale at $1 million.
Yeah.
It's for sale at 1.5 million. This is the price. And look, the other way we can help, Stephen, is, again, legislation in Australia is not that tight. So a brand new listing can go online for consumers to view. And there's not a lot of price guide. They can do a search. Okay, I'm looking between 500 and 800,000, and it falls within that range. But that's a $300,000 variance. Like, where does it fit in my my budget's 650, or my budget's 700. So there's a lot of other ways that agents disguise the price where it's not listed for $1 million. It's for sale. It's contact agent. It's highest offer. It's new to market. They use other taglines to advertise the property, which is very confusing for the consumer. And that's obviously where we help. We can ring the agent and get a straightforward response. But back to your question, the property is either for sale at a price or it's auction. So auction is a very recognised method of sale. It's been very popular probably for a good 20, 30 years, I would think. We do have, in fact, we are attending an auction tomorrow morning. So similar to what you've just described that happens in the States, there are some distress sales. Because the economy in Australia has been pretty strong, we haven't had too many of those. I can't compare numbers with the States, but there's a couple of bank disclosure auctions that are coming up over the next couple of weeks. And there's also some what they call state revenue auctions whereby the state government, in this case Queensland, owners haven't paid their rates. The parents have either gone into a home or passed away, unfortunately, and the kids have just left the house and haven't paid the rates for 5 years.
Right.
So that's a way of the state government recovering that money. So there are a few of those distress sales, obviously in Australia, but more often than not, I'd say 95% of the time, auction is just a recognised method of sale where there's no price guide in Queensland. In other states there is, and this is that I'm not sure whether the states is different to what I'm about to explain, but we've got 5 mainland states and territories and extra territories, and legislation is different in all of them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like
they're similar to counties and things like that.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. So I know in, for example, New South Wales and Victoria are probably the 2 recognised states that do the majority of auctions. But they need to provide the consumer, which I agree with, they need to provide the consumer with a price guide. So they say, based on other houses that have sold in this area, this property will sell for between 1 million and 1.2 million. So here's a guide for you. If you're in this sort of price range, we would expect you'll be able to buy this house. Whereas in Queensland, there's no legislation that allows agents to talk about price. So that's where buyers agents help. But yeah, to answer your question, auction is a very recognised method of sale in Australia, which a lot of people are confused by, and that's where a buyer's agent can help.
Outstanding. I appreciate the clarification. Kind of rapid fire to a couple of them, and then when I get to the meat of another core topic here, and just this one is, are buyer's agents? It seems like this is the normal method of real estate, wanting to go and buy a home or something, is to go and work with some kind of buyer's agent. Would you agree?
So most people that will wake up tomorrow morning, whether they're an individual or a couple or a family, they'll attempt. I don't know whether this is the case in the States. I don't believe it is, but tell me if I'm wrong. But the majority of consumers in Australia attempt to do this themselves. They don't.
Yeah, people in the US do as well. They go and look for something like the multiple listing service, like an MLS, whatever the thing is, online, and then they'll go try and talk to the agent who is representing, like the seller's agent, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So it's very similar. I was just asking because I'm not super familiar with Australian real estate. But given the pricing that you were talking about, the 500, 600,000 up to $1 million or 30 million, it makes sense that, the buyers would have representation, especially considering, the different services like you're talking about, assess and negotiate, or the full service. So your client is definitely someone who's probably making, they're making from the lower end over 100,000 to as high as that can go.
Yeah. And sometimes that's an individual, sometimes that's a couple.
Yeah.
And particularly with couples, but I mean it's just as relevant for both. So an individual person who's either investing or buying their first home or their second home or their third home, it doesn't matter. Most of us in society, with what we do professionally, if we're actively working, which most of us are very time poor. And I said the time you have, so the people that wake up tomorrow morning and say, honey, let's buy a house on the Sunshine Coast, or let's buy a house in Florida, or let's buy a house in Texas, wherever it is,
Mm-hmm.
and they attempt to do that themselves, they have very limited time to do that. They have very limited time to look online, talk to sales agents or realtors, analyze the market, know if it's a good suburb or not. What's the market doing? Where are interest rates? Am I pre-approved? What's my financial position? Some of our clients find it very frustrating because sales agents or realtors are so busy, they often don't get callbacks. They make an inquiry on the property. And again, similar to what I said before about the supply demand shift, is that they'll often go to an open home. Do you have open homes in the States?
Open houses, exactly.
Open houses. They go to an open house and there's 15 other couples there.
Yeah.
And the property's just about to go under contract or it's just about to be sold. And they're scratching their heads like, what are we doing? Like, we've looked at 5 houses today. None of them suit us. So they've got limited time during the week to do all that research I've just mentioned and then line up with dragging their kids around that are sick of it after the third open home. They're all crying and want to go to the beach or have a swim in the pool.
Yeah.
And they've completely wasted their weekend. So that's what most people attempt to do. So I'd say, Stephen, the vast majority, I'd say probably 95% of the clients that we represent have never used a buyer's agent before, and they've been trying to do this themselves unsuccessfully for up to 12 months. So yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. I've been at open homes. I've been at open houses on a Saturday, and it's been a very popular home. And there's a family there, and this is like 10, 11 a.m. in the morning. It's not as if it's late in the afternoon, and they're trying to rustle up their kids. It's like herding cats. They've got 3 or 4 kids. Where's Johnny? Have you seen Johnny? No, I haven't seen Johnny. I thought he was with you. And they're just running around like headless chooks. It's
Right.
crazy. And like, yeah, so that's where buyer's agents can help enormously. Yeah.
I completely agree. I actually used a buyer's agent when I was looking for, and I bought a condo of mine in Seattle, and it was
Oh, wow.
so nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was such a great experience. I went and looked at 4 different places, picked one, done, and I'm like, easy. And anyway, so you know,
That's
I
great.
completely,
That's great to hear. Yeah.
yeah, it was a great experience, and you know, that condo is definitely a little bit over 500K USD, and so
Yep.
you know, that's right around, you know, their, you know, that cost for some of your early younger families too. So, but okay, let's shift the conversation. I appreciate that because that gives the listener a little bit more, just kind of drives it home of the market, how things work. It sounds very decentralized, deregulated, like you're saying. Every man, woman, child is kind of out for themselves on, you know, figuring out the market. And definitely hear that last point, the value of having a buyer's agent and people really experienced like yourself and team help out here too. So talk to me about how you work with investors. And again, you have, you know, interstate, like outside of state, but also you know, people that are overseas. There's going to be a segment of the listeners that are local to, you know, Australia, probably Sydney and
Sure.
Melbourne. Sure. But
Sure.
there'll also be people that would be listening in from, you know, like a Singapore. But, you know, those majority, I'd say the 80-90% would be those that are across the United States and
Yep.
might have that dream to maybe not Florida, but what about Australia? You know, I've had those conversations with people. And so, you know, how do you work with overseas investors or yeah, overseas people that are looking to buy property?
Yeah, great question. So as long as they qualify to buy property in Australia, we have the Foreign Investment Review Board. So a lot of our international clients are expats. So they're couples and they might be married to an American. Um, um, we've had people from France, Hawaii, South America, North America, Asia, Dubai, New Zealand in particular. So yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, we get an understanding from them about what is the purpose for the investment. So why are they investing? regardless
Okay.
of where they're investing. But what's the purpose of the investment? Is it for capital growth, or is it for yield? Because when you're buying
So
rent,
so
yeah,
you're talking, is it for net worth and depreciation or for cash flow, right? Basically.
yeah, correct,
Okay.
correct,
So let's say, see if this example resonates, but say maybe I'm someone who, I'm a couple and together I'm making 800,000 USD. I don't know. Let's say $1,000,000 Australian together. Um, well, we'll say 800. We'll say 800 Australian. Keep the same uh, denomination
yep,
currency.
yep,
Um, and they would like to get some kind of short-term rental. There's a short-term rental market, I'd
there
imagine.
is, yeah,
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 perfect. And they're, I don't know, want to go for around that 500K type of property.
yep, yeah.
Talk to
So what we would, yeah, so we get an understanding of, so if they want to, so what you're talking is short-term accommodation, short-term rental, not long-term.
Yeah, so they could have it being, so that with the idea of them being able to come for maybe a week or so,
Yeah, yeah.
you know
So
what I mean?
they want to be
Time.
able to use it themselves.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's a pretty easy fix, Stephen. I mean, their options would be, um, yeah, apartments along the beachfront.
Okay.
Maybe inland a little bit. You won't get a view for that sort of budget, but we will talk through it with the investor. What's the purpose? So if you want to buy an apartment or you've got 500,000, we want to use it ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, yeah, we'll show you and outline the suburbs that you can afford to buy in. We'll obviously explain the outgoings, so there'll be council rates as well as strata fees. We'll look at the balance of the sinking fund, the age of the building. We'll look at things like roofs, lifts, pools, common areas, parking,
Mm-hmm.
distance to beaches, distance to shopping, distance to public transport, distance to parks, if that's important to them. But we also need to outline this is the return you'll get on short term accommodation, and this is the return you'll get on long term accommodation. Because short term accommodation, like pretty much regardless of where you buy, there's going to be people that are going to be keen to rent it short term for either a weekend or a week over the holiday periods, as long as the investors themselves are happy not to, because that's when you're going to get the peak rates,
Yep.
because it's Christmas, Easter, school holidays, Christmas time, January. Like obviously our summer kicks off later this year, and that's the most popular time for people to go to the beach. So we always give them an analysis on the short-term figures and a basic, like if it's in a building and there's other short-term accommodation properties in there, it might have an occupancy of 40% or 50% or 60%. So as long as they're happy, worst case scenario, that 60% of the time the property's vacant and there's no income, as opposed to you're not going to get a nightly rate, you're going to get a weekly rate, but it's going to be every week of the year. And that
Yeah.
means if you do it on the flip side, and it's long term, that means you can't stay in it. That means
Sure.
it means, would you rather have a holiday in Australia a couple of times a year? Yes, okay, tick that box. Or would you rather have the income from the property? No, we're not interested in the income. We're not interested in the long term income. And we often, like, there's not too many times where we don't, hit the nail on the head and buy in a high growth area. We've got numerous examples of what we paid for properties, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and how much capital growth that property has, improved in the last 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. So yeah,
Cool.
yep,
So you guys will actually do analysis from a rental perspective as well, and help the partner from there. So if there were people that were local to Australia, interstate or a different state, you would
yep,
do that investment sort of investment
correct,
analysis with them and
correct.
for them too.
And they will, customers will always come to us with an idea, with a perfect picture. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
want to fit inside this box. This is the type of property we want. This is our budget. These are the suburbs we have in mind. But as long as we outline all of their outgoings, these are all the costs with holding that investment. These are all the costs that you're going to have, regardless if you've got nobody in it. It's a short-term accommodation project for you. You got no one in it. These are the costs every year. But yeah, and then we'll get on the flip side. And if we explain that to our customer, they'll say, look, Simon, really appreciate you've explained that. We still want to go the short-term route, but then they may change it after 12 months because we have a lot of clients that think they're going to come 2 or 3 times a year and life gets in the way and they just don't visit. And they say, look, just organise to put a full-time or permanent tenant in the property. Yeah, that happens quite a bit.
Got it. So pretty cool. So you not only help from get into the first home, you're also an investment company, and you also find you guys find potentially or find tenants as well, and you also help on the sell side as well.
We we don't help on the sales side. We're licensed real estate agents in Australia or in Queensland. We're licensed, and it's the same license whether you're a selling agent or a buying agent. We don't help owners sell. We often have owners, and this is the other benefit of using a buyer's agent. We often have sellers ring us directly that don't want to go through a selling agent and often offer their properties to us. I wouldn't say it happens regularly, but it happens more often than what a lot of people realise. But the business itself, we have a side business, which is a property management business. So we manage properties for people. So if you or your listeners were to buy a beautiful apartment or regardless of where it is, we'll be able to manage that process for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's a consistent stream of income for you as well as the chunks of when you sell, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Cool. So you guys have been in business for a while. You're deeply integrated into the area. So not only are you doing transactions, but you've got property management. You must have companies, financing companies and stuff like that to refer to as
100%. Yeah. We're a full... Sorry, Stephen.
I was gonna ask, do you have any just kind of painting that picture for, again, the overseas states listeners from you've got partners, right? And, if there's things that are needed, then, you can make recommendations for whatever the need is, from the financing to, property inspection, lawyers, all that stuff. You do that. Obviously, that's helpful. Can you give some insights and maybe some of the things you've seen, requirements or questions to ask and look for out overseas investors? You said if they're qualified to buy, if they're qualified to invest, trying to get an idea of what some of those things are. Like, how many hoops do I have to jump through as an overseas US-based investor, or buyer, if it's something I should even look at?
Yeah, so the federal government are quite protective. I wouldn't say they're stringent, but they're quite protective around. So, Stephen, you're based in Texas.
Yes, sir.
You're an American citizen. Why are you investing? What's your interest in investing in Australian real estate? So that's the Foreign Investment Review Board. So it's a no-brainer. If you had an Australian partner or an Australian spouse or a family member, then that's no problem. That's no issue. But if you're an individual or you've got a partner and you're from another part of the world, then there's a requirement for you to go through the Foreign Investment Review Board. So there's a series of questions that they would ask, probably similar to me. I mean, if I wanted to invest in Austin, Texas, and with all the research I've done, that's where I want to buy. Okay, what requirement do I need as an Australian citizen? I don't have an American spouse.
Green card.
Hey?
Green card, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So that's what, your listeners, if they are American based and they're really interested in, because it's a great question, because if they've got X amount to invest, are they better putting that money where that money's going to work best for them? where they're going to
Yep.
get the best outcome. Now, whether that's something that they can use themselves on a holiday, fantastic. But even if, I had an example recently where we bought a property, what we call opportunistic investing. So, opportunistic investing is we see a property, the client's not actively looking, but we see it's such a good buying opportunity. We mention it to the client buys the property, and then they flip that property in 1 to 2 years because the capital growth's been so strong.
Yep.
We've bought a property, in the 800,000s, and we sell it for 1.1. We say to the client, this is a good time to get out of this property. I think the growth has been fantastic. There's a lot of activity from buyers in that region of the coast now. I think you should look at selling it. And that's exactly what's just happened with a client in the last 2 months. Bought the property 2 years ago and they've just sold it. And, if I said to you, Stephen, give me $1 million and I'll give you 1.25 in 2 years, like, who wouldn't take up that offer?
Yeah. 25% return. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe, there's different growth areas of the coast that are stronger than others. But
Mm-hmm.
like, I know Budrum as a non-coastal suburb, so it's grown 85% in the last 4 years. So that's just remarkable growth. And I don't think there's two other. Obviously your audience would probably know better than I would. I've always been interested in property. There's other investors that look at other things like Bitcoin and shares and gold and silver, minerals, and bonds and all those sorts of things. But property's my jam. That's what I'm more interested in. I like the bricks and mortar and the land. I like
Yep.
to see, or a business. I like to see, okay, if I buy that business and this is the way I market that business, I'm going to get growth in that business and it's going to be a good, solid investment for me. So that's
100%.
what that's what appeals to me and my team. And I think once your listeners have decided that's the avenue they're going to go down, and they're interested in property, then that's where we come in.
Cool. Appreciate those details. Let's pivot a little bit. Before we're getting to know each other a little before we started recording, and you're basically saying if it's some kind of property, you've taken a crack at it. I wanted to come up with something clever and say, if it moves, about it, but it doesn't fit here. So, well, if it has some kind of structure, then and your team has taken a crack at it, I'll figure out something more clever. But anyway, the point being is, you're looking at a commercial property as well, and
Yeah.
one of the things that we're really big into is syndications, commercial property for apartments, multifamily. Our opportunistic is development, land development, build to rent, build to sell, all that kind of stuff. And so, do you and team buy apartments, like entire complexes or anything like that?
Yeah, that's been on our radar in the past. There hasn't been a lot of opportunities so much, Stephen. I know that there's other buyers agents that I'm connected to in other parts of Australia. That's more their jam. They have a lot of what we call development clients or developer
Mm.
clients. And I've worked with developers over the years. That takes a lot longer. That process takes a lot longer. So if a client comes to me and says, "Yeah, I want to buy a complex. I want to buy,"
Mhm.
like what we refer to them as 4-pack, 6-pack, 8-pack, 12-pack. 12-pack means there's 12 units in the
Yep.
complex. You know, so that takes a lot longer. But yeah, when we were talking before we were on air, um, we often have the customer says, "Is there a part of the Sunshine Coast, or is there a buyer demographic, or is there a property type that you guys specialise in?" Most of our work is in the residential field, but I often say, look, if it's property related, like we'll have a crack at it. Like we'll try and find it for you if we think it's achievable. And look, this was the problem through COVID. The market, Stephen, in Australia in 2020 and 2021 was moving so quickly. It was moving so quickly that we'd have an inquiry today. We're overwhelmed with inquiry. We couldn't help everyone because there's only so much we can do. and their budget was $500,000 to buy a 3-bedroom unit with a nice view of the water.
Yeah, fast.
That's what you can do now. You can buy that now, but in 3 months' time, you need 600,000 to buy that
Yep.
property. Your budget doesn't stretch that far. So, yeah, we've worked with developers, but we always explain the developer. We always make sure. So, how much experience have you got? What's your capital look like? What projects have you done before? Is this new to you? We have a few families that come to us and they're looking at dabbling in development, but they really have got no experience and no understanding. And I've had a lot of interstate developers ring me from different parts of Australia. They all want to buy Noosa because Noosa is the premier coastal location on the Sunshine Coast, probably one of the premier coastal locations in Australia. And for what they want to buy, it's just not achievable.
Got it.
They don't have
I
the
was
budget.
thinking. Sorry, I was gonna. What I was thinking is from the perspective of, um, if there's anything you can speak to, where many people are, you're talking about the busy professional, the busy couple, the busy client who doesn't have much time but wants to purchase a house. I'm coming at this from a slightly of sort of very similar angle, but the busy person who wants to invest, not necessarily buy a house, but if there's any types of passive investments. Um, uh, from their perspective. And I realize that's not your business. I was just asking if there's anything you can comment on about any types of passive investments in Australia.
So give me an example of what you would describe
Sure.
as a passive investment.
So what I'm thinking of is, you know, um, again, this is a maybe there's so like a mortgage or a note example, like buying like a note from someone is a passive investment. Or um, so
Buying a
so
note.
yeah, so let me use a different example. So syndications here in US, it's there's be someone who like an operating partner, like a team who goes and finds an apartment complex, 100 pack as an example, right, of units, and it's, I don't know, 10 million bucks as an example. And so they'll go to a commercial bank and they'll get the loan for the 7 million, and they need to go raise the equity, raise
Okay.
for 3 million. And then we'll have a group of, I'll go talk to tech professionals, and other people on the team will go and find people to raise that remaining $3 million to go and acquire this property. And so all of those other investors that were part of that 3 million, they'll get a certain return, and they're passive investors.
Gotcha. Yeah, that I know of investors that do that with what we call a going concern. So a going concern is an income producing asset.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those could be in the commercial, like in hospitality, in
Yeah.
commercial, more so than residential. I mean, it's not that it wouldn't work with a 100 pack or a 10 pack or a 20 pack apartment building. I get that. I think might be different in the States though, Stephen. We often talk to investors, and one of the key questions we ask them is, "What's your appetite for risk?"
Mm. Yeah.
And in Australia, we're probably, as opposed to the States, we're probably a little bit more conservative, and people like to stay in their own lane. I mean, I have an appetite for risk. I absolutely do.
Totally.
If it's property related and someone put an opportunity in front of me and I could see what I call blue sky. So blue sky means, okay, it might be stormy at the moment because the economy's tight, but this is not going to be our life forever. Like, there's going to be blue sky. The storm will clear and there's going to be blue sky. So if I get in when it's stormy, if I invest my money in when it's stormy and I look at the big picture, I'm in. Yeah. I've got an appetite for risk. Whereas I think overall in Australia, that appetite for risk is probably more conservative.
It means more certainty in the decision making,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that is a good thing when you're thinking about cash. So I'm
yeah.
on board.
Correct. Cash flow is really important, but there's also people out there that have, for example, I've just done a bit of a road trip with my partner through the southern states, and we went and saw a really dear friend of mine. Here's an example of what might answer your question, and they're both getting to a stage where they're looking to retire. He's been in an industry, and his wife's been in a different industry, but they're quite they're asset rich and they're cash rich. And one of their friends who they've also been in business with in pharmacies, like is that what you call them in the States?
Yep.
Pharmacies. Yep. So she was a pharmacist, um, and one of the business partners' brothers was heavily involved in the hotel industry, so owned pubs or hotels.
Mm.
Is that what you call them in the States?
Yeah.
Hotels?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
like bars. Yeah,
Yeah.
go to the bar, go to the local bar. And because of his contacts in that industry, which they had no contacts, they reached out and said, "Look, would you be interested in investing in a hotel? Like it's going to be purchased at a good price. It's stormy, using that analogy. It's stormy at the moment
Yep.
because the hotel industry is not firing in this particular part of New South Wales. However, if we've already done a spreadsheet on what we can do to lift the profile of the pub or the hotel,
Yeah. The
um,
value.
and they invested in that like 5 years ago. It wasn't a huge outlay, but they just needed some cash flow, some cash to finance the deal, to buy the pub, to lift its profile, and now they get a detailed report every month, and it's been a great investment for them. It's been an
Hmm.
outstanding, and they weren't like, if you told us 10 years ago we're going to get into the pub game, we would have said you're crazy. But it's not. It's not all in. They're not taking all of the risk.
Right.
But for whatever they invested, again, their appetite for risk was, yeah, we're prepared to throw 300, 400, 500,000 at this pub, no problem. And the return is probably tenfold.
Right.
So, yeah, that's probably
Yeah.
an example of what you were talking about.
Very. Yeah. Very similar. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. Real estate's so cool, man. But
It is. It
uh,
is. It is. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
I want to be sensitive to your time, Simon. I know we're a little over from our hour. Quickly, tell me a couple things that you see people do wrong when they come and work with you, so that people have an idea to make sure to get in order before they come and knock on your door, and then we'll kind of close up from there. Like,
Yeah. So the biggest mistake, Stephen, that I think buyers in the marketplace make is that they're very closed in their attitude as to what's the right type of property for them and their circumstance and the suburb or suburbs that they want to buy in, and they're not open to other opportunities. And whether that's an owner occupier, or we're buying their principal place of residence or their home, or whether that's an investment. We had a client from Melbourne. They didn't know the Sunshine Coast at all, but thought they had, with what the budget they had to buy something near the beach. And the attitude that the wife, I eventually got out of the wife after a few weeks, was, Simon, we don't like any of these investments because I don't see myself living in any of these houses. I said, well, that's not the point. You're not living in any of these houses. That the tenant will live in the house. And they felt they needed something near the beach. And with their budget, they could buy something near the beach, but it needed a lot of work. It was very run down. So we ended up buying them something 40 minutes from the beach, but it's a fantastic investment. They've got a lot of capital growth in that area. They've got a fantastic tenant in it. It's a home that's only 5 years old, and
wow.
it's a great investment. It's a great investment, but it doesn't, like, not every investment needs to be on the beach or on the canal or near the river. Or, yeah, the Sunshine Coast is a coastal market, but there's other areas of the coast that's not coastal. So keep an open mind, and a buyer's agent is there to guide you and advise you and make recommendations that they believe are a good fit for you and your portfolio and what you're looking to achieve.
Outstanding. Cool, man. Talk to me about where can people find you? I know you. I've watched some of your YouTube videos. That was cool to see there. Where
Yeah.
can people? How would you like them to reach out?
That's awesome, Stephen. So we've got a website, we've got a YouTube channel. We're very big on Instagram. We have a big following on Instagram. So on Instagram, we're at Coast Property Buyers. So COAST Property Buyers. Website is the same, coastpropertybuyers.com. Reach out. We've also got an email address, hello, HELLO at coastpb.com. We're easy to contact. Really appreciate. It's great to talk to you from the other side of the world, Stephen, and we'd love to help any of your listeners if they've got any more questions. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a chat today. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out.
Outstanding. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you. I'll get all that in the show notes for the listeners too.
Cheers, Stephen.
Awesome. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Path to Passive. We love connecting with our listeners and those on the path to architecting their wealth and improving their lives. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to see in future episodes. Get in touch with us through email or Instagram. See you next week for a new episode.